As we go into these, it'll be about 15 minutes each on these presentations. The first is our Heising Outstanding Undergraduate Teacher Award. We have Joanna Girant from Economics. And what I'm going to share here as I introduce each of our faculty colleagues is just what they said when they were recognized in the fall assembly, as you all may remember. She says that her approach to teaching has evolved into two major principles: being mindful of how learning to think as an economist will benefit the students, so deliberately focusing on developing those skills, and using the science of how people learn and remember to create the best conditions for learning. Overall, to me, it's about keeping an open mind, experimenting, and thoroughly enjoying the process. Please join me in a very warm welcome to Joanna Girant.
So this is not a teaching presentation. Now, if I were sitting where you guys are, I'd probably have questions, because this is a teaching workshop. What am I doing here? The inspiration for this title came from a 1929 surrealist painting, The Treachery of Images, also known as the This Is Not a Pipe painting by René Magritte. And people, oh boy, they had questions. So here's what I did. I used AI, and I asked it to generate a few images. And my prompt was a professor teaching a class in the style of René Magritte. Now notice, these images are very familiar. They include a professor, they include students. And they're familiar because we've been doing this for centuries. And actually, these images come from the Middle Ages, the late Middle Ages, centuries 14th and 15th. And what do you see? The same thing, a professor and students with varying degrees of attention. Now, this is not a teaching presentation because I don't want to talk about what is happening here. These images depict a type of approach, a professor-centered approach, and one that I have been moving away from for the last semesters. And I want to show you how my journey began. Presentation. Okay, if I am going to, oh, by the way, before I get to it, a few changes over the last semesters and ever since 2016. So when I started this experience, I started meeting students or meeting classes of 75 students, and we met in active learning classrooms. So students sat around round tables and collaborated there. And now my classes are slightly larger, sometimes 300 plus students, and we meet in big amphitheaters. And also, I used to meet my students for an hour and 15 minutes twice a week, but now I teach in the hybrid format. So I only meet them for about 1 hour and 15 minutes a week. So every moment, every second of our time is so precious. Now, if I want to start talking to you about student-centered pedagogy, I need to know who is taking my classes. And so every semester in our first class, I conduct a survey. Now, I ask a variety of questions to my students. I ask them what their expectations are, what they think is going to be their biggest challenge, even if there's something that they want to share with me, something that they want me to know. But all of those surveys, they begin with one question. Have you taken an econ course before? Now, 20% of my students have never taken econ, and the remaining 80% have taken some sort of econ before, in high school, in college, or a combination of both. Now, a follow-up question to this is, well, if you did have an econ course, did you like it? Take a deep breath. 22% did not. 40% are like, indifferent. And the remaining 38% did enjoy it. They either liked it or they liked it very, very much. And by the way, these data come from the last 3 semesters, including this one, and I have about 2,000 students. Now, for the dreaded question, why are you here? And now notice I give my students some alternatives. They're either there for fun, or actually it's not either, because they can choose both. They can be there for fun, and the course can be required. Here's the answers. Another deep breath. And so I have about 12% of my students who are taking my classes and they're motivated. They want to be there. The other, yeah. A lot of people that I really need to motivate. And this is where the student-centered pedagogy comes in. And now, to me, this is based on 2 very important pillars. And one is to create a learning experience that really places the students first. And the second one is based on the science of how people learn. I'm going to talk about this very briefly, but note that these categories, they necessarily overlap. They are not mutually exclusive. So what does that mean to create a learning experience that puts students first? It means that we need to align our attitudes with this ethos. It means that as I create this learning experience for the students, I invite them, and I invite them to collaborate with me and to each other. And they become responsible for their own learning. How do I do this? I begin by creating a student-centered syllabus, and one that explains the rationale for the course, and it explains the rationale of the course policies. And some of them, because they are learning economics and they're learning to think as an economist, I even phrase them in terms of economics. Now, you guys know from science and from ourselves, we learn better when we're curious, when we are motivated, when we have questions that we want answered. And so I work on that motivation, and I give students meaning for the skills that they are developing. I also mentioned that I use the science of how people learn to create the entire learning experience and to craft each one of the classes. I am so psyched or so enthusiastic about these science-based effective learning strategies that I share them with my students. I told you I have a student-centered syllabus, and I have this entire section in my syllabus of study tips with resources in case they want to learn more and if they want to know the science of why I say this. I always explain to them, these are not things that work for me. These are things that the science says helps people learn better. And also, in my Canvas, I create this entire study tips module with resources, including, for example, strategies for note-taking that I notice that my students struggle with it. Now, I'm also, and again, remember, these are not mutually exclusive categories, I'm also very keen on using and on emphasizing the role of practice, metacognition, and feedback. So at all points, I want my students realizing the extent and the depth of their knowledge in economics. Now, I told you that in my syllabus, I explained the rationale for course policies, and specifically, I explained to them why it is that they are taking a flipped and a hybrid course. I explained to them, and again, with the resources in case they want to explore, that research in cognitive science indicates that people learn better and they performed better in classes that are not lecture-based. But I notice, even when they initially feel otherwise, because my students often used to tell me, or this is also known in the literature, that students often feel that they would learn more in a lecture-based class. And the reason why we do this is because we are poor judges of our own knowledge. And you're recognizing that I'm mentioning metacognition here. I'm going to invite you to join me on an exercise that I ask my students to participate in. Has this ever happened to you? And raise your hands if it has, and leave them up. Leave them up. And if you don't put them up, I know you're lying. Leave them up. And look around. We all have been tricked. In my course, I don't call it metacognition. I call it find your cupcakes. And so how do I deal with the cupcakes in our class? Deliberately. So I craft these classes to really shine a very, very bright light on these blind spots, on these gaps in knowledge that students bring. Remember, I teach a flipped course. They come to class prepared, thinking that they've understood the material. Of course, I align the incentives. They have pre-graded assignments that are due right before class, but they still don't know the extent of the gaps in their knowledge. And in addition to this, if I want my students to develop the ability to apply economics tools and models to solve problems and to make better informed decisions, they need to practice that in the classes. And so what I'm going to show you next is a few of the exercises that I bring to class. I have so many. The first one, I ask students to apply real-world events and use the production possibilities model to represent those real-world events. That exercise in the middle here. Now, you tell me, have you ever noticed that Häagen-Dazs and Ben & Jerry's, they tend not to produce the same kind of ice cream? Now, Häagen-Dazs produces very smooth flavors, and typically Ben & Jerry's has these chunky flavors. Have you ever noticed that? So when I saw that in the news, I immediately thought game theory, prisoner's dilemma. And I thought this was the perfect application to talk about strategic interaction, Nash equilibrium, dominant strategies, and tacit collusion. Over there, my students, I asked, in 2016, when Mylan jacked up the price of the EpiPen by 400%, what happened to the total revenue? I was psyched. 80% of the students got this question correct. They did it because they could, because demand is inelastic. Now, I don't just bring news. I love bringing video, bringing clips bringing clips of series, of movies. Over there, Homer has a problem. It's Valentine's Day. He has no presents for Marge. He ends up buying a box of chocolates that's very, very expensive because demand is inelastic. In that middle clip there, that scene is priceless. It's a scene from Breaking Bad. And Jesse and Walter White are having a conversation. And Walter White, in his grave tone, says, "We're not charging enough. You corner the market and you raise the price." Simple economics. Economics is all around us. And the last example I'm bringing you. In that scene, Idris Elba is playing a gangster, and he's trying to convince his crew members, because they have a money laundering business, he's trying to convince them to run a real business. And then he explains, you are acting like we got an inelastic product, and we don't. We have an elastic problem. We have an elastic product. I couldn't have asked for more. And if you want to know any more about how I do this, there's a video that I'll be very happy to share with you. Thank you so much.